Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to another exciting lecture on world religions. In this series, we are analyzing religions of the past, religions of the future, and religions of the present. So it's sort of a broad approach to world religions. We are in the first decades of the 21st century. We are in the beginning years of the third millennium. So we have to start looking seriously at the religions of the past and the new expressions, the so-called new religious movements of the present, and try to imagine what is the future going to offer us when it comes to religions. So we're analyzing the scope of religions. Now, I'm not a minister, a preacher, a rabbi, or an imam or anything. I'm a historian of religion. My background is a MTS in world religions from Harvard Divinity School, PhD in international politics. So I'm very concerned about the role of religions in international affairs and especially the future, and a BA and an MA in modern history. So I'm looking into the future as a historian. So today's topic is Confucianism. On the right, you see a statue of Confucius, which is in the Chinatown in Lower Manhattan here in New York City. I live in Queens, and on the other side of Queens is Flushing, which is the newest Chinatown in the city. So, once again, this is the outline. Number one is the founder. Fundamental issue in analyzing every world religion and every cult and every sect is the personality of the founder. I mean, we've all seen posters and bumper stickers, what would Jesus do? Or what would Muhammad do? Or what would Abraham or Moses do? Or what the founder, the personality of the founder very often determines the character of the religion if it survives. Secondly, paradise, another what I call universal building block of religion. We all aim at a perfect society. Now, for most Christians, they've pretty well given up on this world and we're going to get the perfect society in heaven. Although now in America, with a high standard of living and health and extending life approaching 100, we are less hoping for happiness in heaven, and we sort of want it here and now. Well, Confucianism is a society that is this worldly. There's no heaven, there are no gods floating around on clouds, eating pizza and drinking Budweiser. It is a this worldly religion. So Confucianism is basically how to create a perfect society here on Earth. Beginning with the emperor, or in the case of China today, the president at the top, going down through kingdom, local communities, role of education, covenants, agreements, the role of the family and extended family, and finally at the bottom, the individual. And then finally, we will wrap it up with Confucianism today. So let's get going. Now, in studying any world religion, any cult, and any sect of today, I use a certain methodology, 5 steps for analyzing a religion. And number one is I isolate the universal building block. Now, a building block of religion can be many things. It can be food. When you think of halal food for Islam, kosher for Judaism, and even if a religion doesn't have a food building block, it invents one. Think Christmas cookies, think chocolate Easter bunnies, think Easter eggs. I mean, if a universal building block is not in a language, then it is there to be resuscitated and brought back to life. But of course, you have to define the building block. How do you define God? For Jews and Muslims, there's one God. For Christians, there are three gods. For Hindus, there are thousands of gods. For Confucianists, there are no gods. What is the function of the building block? When the Pentecostals restored the universal building block of sacred language in the form of what we call speaking in tongues, it served a function. America was pluralistic, new immigrants pouring in, everybody speaking a different language. So language became important. But then the Catholic Church eliminated the sacred language when it got rid of Latin. What was the function of the language? Growing up Catholic, I could go to church in any country in the world. It was the same Mass. It was the same Latin. I could respond. The power of a building block. When you take something like food or a holiday, it unites people. It says we are different from everybody else. And then finally, any new founder of a religion, whether it is Confucius or whether it is the Buddha or whether it is Muhammad or Jesus or any other, Elijah Muhammad or any other great religious leader, they have to seriously decide how to assemble the building blocks. What role is architecture? What role is music? What role is food going to play? What universal building blocks will we ignore and which ones will we emphasize? So that is what we are talking about. So once again, this is Dr. Ronald Brown welcoming you to another exciting lecture on religion in the world today, and especially the religion of the world of the future. So let's get started. Well, China and Confucianism is something that I know. I don't talk about a religion or a movement unless I have been there, seen it, and done it. In April 2005, I spent a month traveling from, if you can look at the map on the left, you see Beijing, the capital. Then I went down to Shanghai on the coast over on the right, and then inland, visiting several places to Xi'an, or Xi'an, as many people pronounce it, which is the end of the Silk Route, and then back to Beijing. And so it was a triangle of 1 month, but it was a fascinating experience of a Confucian society. On the right, there's me going up to the Temple of Heaven, one of the must-see sites of China. Now, the first building block we are going to analyze is, of course, the founder. His name was Confucius, which I'm sure I'm not pronouncing correctly, which was Latinized by the first Christian missionaries into Confucius. Now, he was a historic figure. We know a lot about him. Born 551 BCE, before the Common Era, or BC, died 479. And the picture of Confucius, the great teacher, is very important. He was born in the Shandong province, which you see on the right, which is highlighted. It is one of the coastal provinces south of Beijing, but north of Shanghai, sort of one of the heartlands of ancient Chinese culture. Now, very important, he, as the founder, never claimed to be a god, never claimed to get revelations from God or from Angel Gabriel or have any divine inspiration. He was neither a god nor a prophet. He was and remained a human being, a perfectly ordinary human being. Well, ordinary maybe not, because he was a very wise and educated man, but he was a man nonetheless. He was no prophet like Muhammad or Abraham. He was no God like Jesus or son of God like Jesus. He didn't speak with the gods as Joseph Smith did, the founder of the Mormons. He was a human being. And this is very, very important because it indicates that to establish a religion, to organize a perfect society, we don't need a God. We don't need angel Gabriels and gods revealing 10 commandments to humans. Confucius laughed at the 10 commandments, saying, do you really need a God to tell you, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal? I mean, isn't that simply common sense, the basis for any civilized human society? What do we need a God to tell us something that is so self-evident? Well, first we have to define the building block. Once again, he was not a Messiah. There was no divine inspiration or no divine intervention. He was a human being who lived in China at a specific time, had a specific job, and was a very concrete, down-to-earth human being. Now, the titles used to describe Confucius are many, but they all center around the one thing. He was a teacher, sometimes referred to as a master, which would be similar to our professor, an extreme sage, departed teacher, great sage, first teacher, model teacher for 10,000 ages. So he was not a god or a prophet or anything like that. He was a teacher. He entered government service, both as governor of town, minister of crime. And so when he was talking about creating the perfect society, he was a hands-on person. He was not sitting in a palace somewhere telling everybody what to do. He was governing a town, making sure the people survived catastrophes, punishing criminals, running an effective society. So he was not just a professor in an ivory tower. He applied his teaching, both as instructing his students and applying it to society. Now, this is extremely important to remember. He was a human being. He is not worshipped as a god. And in fact, when you go to a Confucian temple, you do not see a statue of the Confucius inside. There might be one outside, but inside is a book, his teachings, in the sense that it resembles a synagogue, in the sense that the book is what is important. Or it resembles a mosque where there are no sacrifices and no altars and no statues. You recite from the Quran. So he was not a prophet, not a god, not a son of a god, no divine intervention, no divine revelation. He was a scholar. And even when you look at pictures of him, he is always dressed as a scholar. Now, we don't know that that's a scholar the way he's dressed, but if I would be sitting there and presenting myself as a scholar, I would be wearing my academic gowns and that square hat with the tassel. So he was a human being. Now, that is very different from other founders. He was not a Muhammad. He was not a Jesus. He was not a Joseph Smith. He was not a Reverend Moon, the founder of a new religion. He did not claim to be a Messiah or anything else other than an educated human being. Now, another universal building block of religions is, of course, a book. Since the Zoroastrians in Persia, the first religion of the book, religions since then have focused on a book. Now, whether it is a book in book form, whether it's a manuscript, whether it's a Torah scroll, or whether it is the teachings of the Confucius carved onto bamboo sheets, it is a teaching. The writings and the teachings of Confucius were organized by his followers in a book called the Analects and presented much like the script we see below. His followers would write down what he said between 475 and 221 BC for the Common Era, and gradually a body of teachings emerged. Now, a book is very important because a book marks a transition from animal sacrifice religion to book religion. We see that in the Jewish Bible. Whereas in the Temple of Solomon, animals were sacrificed. It was blood sacrifice. The people were sprayed with animal blood. The Aztecs had human sacrifice. Whereas with the Zoroastrians, we had the first religion which moved to the next step in the evolution of religion from animal sacrifice to the study of a book of teachings. And this inspired Judaism to pass from temple Judaism to rabbinical Judaism. It inspired Jesus to go from animal sacrifice to worship in today churches. Islam abandoned animal sacrifice and adopted the teaching. And so here again on the right, we see a portrait of teacher Confucius giving a lecture. So books became important. So if anybody out there listening to me today is thinking of inventing a new religion, realize sacrificing animals in temples is finished. We are now moving into and well established into the age of spiritual teachings, books, and study. Now, a fundamental building block of every religion is, of course, paradise. This is the goal of religions. Every religion has some form of paradise, ideal society. For many religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, it was the Garden of Eden as described in the book of Genesis. This was derived largely from the Babylonian teachings. The story of the Tower of Babel, the Garden of Eden, and Noah, and all of that were adopted by Judaism from the Babylonian religion. But it posts the ideal paradise as a time in the past when the lion lay down with the lamb, when there was no war, when there was peace. So many religions have a golden age at some time in the past. Other religions say that the golden age, the paradise, is somewhere in the future, that Jesus is going to return as the Messiah. The Muslim Mahdi is going to return. The Jews have their Messiah who is going to show up, make all things right, and rule for a millennium. So here again, when you talk about heaven and paradise and no perfect world, the distinction is it in the past or is it in the future? And of course, for Confucius, it was definitely a past golden age. Now, Confucianism also teaches that humans are basically good. Thomas Hobbes, for example, in his book Leviathan, insisted that humans were basically evil, corrupt, conniving, greedy creatures, and that we needed a government and society to keep us in check because we are intrinsically evil people. So here again, the Leviathan, as the name means, it is a monster ruling humanity. Well, this is one view of the state of nature: chaos, greedy, warlike people in need of firm government to keep them in order. Now, the origin of humanity, according to the Leviathan. Well, we emerged and creatures living in caves with animals. We intermarried with animals. We were naked, wild animals eating raw meat and wild plants. Well, gradually humans evolved, and there were 5 kings in ancient times who separated animals from humans, shaped and crafted human society. Gods gave them tools, and the kings instructed them in values. So, according to teachers like Hobbes, we began as depraved creatures, and we needed a strong ruler, strong kings, even to separate humans from animals. Well, this goal of improving society, whether it is the long forgotten Garden of Eden and the fall of humanity, or whether it is the evolution of humanity as part and parcel with animals, many philosophers and thinkers have attempted to improve society, to create a perfect society here on earth, or recreate a perfect society. Humans are not like birds. I mean, the doves outside my window return every year, and they go to the same nest in the same pine tree, and they raise their babies, and they come up and poop all over my balcony. But I tolerate them because they are a pretty cooing animal. But I have yet to see the doves show up with bags of cement and steel beams and build a permanent nest somewhere, or to improve on their evolutionary state. Whereas humans constantly want to create a new society, recreate the Garden of Eden, forge human beings into a perfect society. Now, in upstate New York, we have the famous Oneida community of the mid-1800s, where Americans and European immigrants would gather, equality of men and women, education, common labor, living in total freedom and harmony, creating a perfect society. Brigham Young ordered his Mormons to go to Salt Lake City, and he created a perfect society in Salt Lake City centered around the Mormon religion. Karl Marx also was going to create the perfect society here on earth, a classless society without the superstitions of religion, where from each according to his ability, to each according to her need. Catholic monasteries, another example of creating a perfect society. St. Benedict said the day was divided into parts, one part for work, one part for prayer, one part for leisure and education, and one part for sleep. Once again, creating a perfect human society here on earth. Well, Oneida, the Mormons, and the Catholics all relied on a God to inspire them and to give them instructions. Karl Marx, on the other hand, said we don't need divine inspiration. Humans are smart enough and skilled enough to come up with their own rules. But still, this human impulse, this drive, not to be satisfied with a bird nest that was invented thousands of years ago and has remained basically unchanged until the present, but we can constantly improve society. Well, for Confucius, he was not relying on any God to come down to tell him how to do it. He was a historian. He studied history. For him, the golden age was not some distant Garden of Eden or some mystical idea taken from a religious teacher. He believed that the Chu dynasty, which reigned in China from 1046 to 256 BCE, over 1,000 years, was in fact a golden age. when China existed in harmony. It was rich, it was prosperous, it was peaceful, it was civilized and cultivated, and people were happy. So Confucius idealized this golden age, and he spent his life studying it. What had made this society perfect? So he was not creating a theory out of whole cloth or having some god giving him instructions. He went back to the Chu dynasty, studied it, and said, what made this society great? So, if anything, he was a historian, a political scientist, an engineer, social engineer, who was out to recreate a society of the Chu dynasty which had once existed. Now, the founder of the Shu dynasty was Ji Chang. Once again, I'm sure I'm not pronouncing these very well, so bear with me, who lived from 1152 1056, and King Wu from 1046 to 1043 were the founder and the first great kings of Shu. So here again, we're not dealing with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. We are dealing with real live people who have left behind them inscriptions and monuments and ruins of buildings who we can, as archaeologists and historians, we can study and analyze and learn what made this society great. The Western Shu dynasty was precisely where the teacher Confucius grew up and lived. It was a high point of Chinese culture. Beautiful porcelain, carved jade, magnificent textiles made of the finest silk. It's really when Chinese culture reached its high point. Well, needless to say, every golden age declines. Civil wars broke out. The central government became decadent. Princes were fighting over who would be the emperor. The Tibetans from the south invaded China and overthrew the Chu dynasty. The result from 500 to 221 BCE was called the Warring States period, a time of civil war, of strife. So this was the time when Confucius was living, a time of confusion, warring states, the low point, according to him, of Chinese society. So he set out to restore the golden age of Shu, studying documents, interviewing people, collecting information, writing, teaching on what caused this great society to pass from a golden age to a decline. Now, we see very much the same thing today when Donald Trump says, make America great again. The question is, when was America great? And for Donald Trump, it was in the 1960s when Flushing was all white. America was 90% Christian, 90% white, and 90% middle class. Well, in 1965, according to Donald Trump, the Hart-Celler immigration law opened the gates of immigration, and Donald Trump's beloved Queens passed from its golden age of white Christian queens, and it became Chinese. It became Eastern European Jewish. It became Indian, African, Mexican, and that was the decline. So Confucius was very much like Donald Trump in one way. We lost our golden age. Why did we lose it? And what should we do to make it great again? And so the golden age of Manchu was a time of peace. It was a time of prosperity, of strong families, and the Golden Age had overcome all of the evils of the ancient society. So, what exactly was the Confucian perfect society? Well, his society was a pyramid. Once again, the fundamental building blocks of Confucianism. Here again, at the top, we have the emperor. Well, today we don't have an emperor in China, but we have Prime Minister Xi, who, as I speak, is being accused by many people of being a new emperor totalitarian ruler. But Confucius said a good, strong, well-organized, and moral and ethical ruler is central to a perfect society. Under that came the kingdom, surrounding himself with good, loyal, and efficient administrators and governors. Local community. Every city had its mayor, every town had its leader, its police force. Education was central. Confucianism is very much into education. Now, it didn't build temples and worshiping gods. It was educating the people in the elements of a peaceful, prosperous, well-regulated society. Number 3 were covenants, meaning if you make a business agreement, you abide by it. If you get married, you abide by the parameters of your marriage contract. Next came the family, the extended family. In fact, Chinese are notorious for returning to their ancestral homeland, tending to the tombs. It's called the tomb sweeping holiday, when they will travel thousands of miles from New York back to some obscure village in the middle of China to honor their ancestors. And finally, at the bottom is the individual. Now, for Westerners, we put the individual at the top, whereas in China, they put the individual at the bottom. Now, we've seen a perfect example of this as I speak. We're in the last days of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we saw how the Chinese, very ruthlessly, when a building or a town was discovered to have the virus, the police and the army went in, drug people kicking and screaming from infected apartments, and put them into quarantine. Whereas in the United States, you had churches and synagogues and individuals who said, I won't wear a mask because it violates my individual freedom. I will not limit my right to own a gun. If I want to kill somebody, it is my individual freedom to have a gun and to defend myself. So you see two very different views of society. For China, a perfect, well-run, prosperous society is goal number 1. Individual freedoms, what we would call our Bill of Rights in the United States, is relegated to the bottom. Very important for Confucianism are rites and ceremonies. China is until today a very ceremonious society. Even the way you speak. How do you speak to older people? What words do you use speaking to an older brother? What words to a younger brother? What word to your father's brother, to your mother's brother? What words do you use to the emperor? Even the way we speak is determined by Confucian society. Now, the Book of Rites and Ceremonies was written by his followers in the year 907. And it describes the rites and ceremonies regulating marriage, clothing, how you should dress, Remember the old American expression, clothes make the man. How to organize meals, a tea ceremony, eating a meal, cooking, regulating father-son relationship, elder son to younger son, husband-wife relationships, rituals for mourning. Very important. When someone dies, they don't go to a better place, as we would say in Christian circles. When they're dead, they are dead, but they live on in the example they set for their descendants. So funerals are a good insight into how a society views death. Ancestor veneration. You are not an individual alone. You are determined by the deeds, both good and bad, of your ancestors. You inherit, we might say, karma from your ancestors. And if you commit a crime, this will be on the heads of your children, who will be constantly remembered. Yes, I remember your father robbed a store, and that is a stain on the extended family going back for generations. Rules and rights for music, games, archery, control of the body, banquets, how to organize the banquets, who sits where, rules for court etiquette, emperor veneration. As the top of the pyramid, the emperor lived in the forbidden city. How to wage warfare, the use of colors. What do the different colors mean? So all of these were eventually written down by his followers in 907, taking the teachings of Confucius and elaborating on them. Once again, the bottom, lowest rank is the individual. The rights of man in French, or the Bill of Rights in American Constitution, are not the same importance as they are in Confucianism. You are part of a larger society. If a COVID or a disease is breaking out, the good of the greater society is more important than one individual right. The family. Now, here again, how do you define the family? In the West, it is the nuclear family, mom, pop, and the kids. Well, in Confucianism, it is the extended family, all your living aunts and uncles and third cousins and fourth cousins. It is the clan or the tribe. Always ask a Chinese or other countries influenced by Confucianism, Vietnam, Korea, Japan, Mongolia, Tibet. What clan or tribe do they have? People are always impressed with the Koreans because they all seem to have the same 3 last names. Well, it's more than 3, but they do symbolize a tribe or a clan from which they are descended. Ancestors. Many Chinese will know their ancestors' names going back generations. And your descendants. If you commit a crime, it will reflect poorly on your descendants for generations. So when Confucius said family, that person means more than just the nuclear family that we have in the West. Now, the function of the family in Confucianism, well, it's social. I mean, anybody who has seen a relative babysitting a little tiny baby, teaching the baby how to talk or how to walk or something like that, there is a socialization function. Reproduction within the limits of the family. No single mothers having babies with different men and raising them alone, but the family unit raises the child. Family unit is economic. It is the men who work, some women who work, take care of elderly, don't put them in old people's homes, take in orphans as part of the family. The men defend the family. You have a sense of duty to the family. It's not just me living here in Queens all alone by myself, but I have an obligation to be aware of what is happening in my extended family. The family is also a sense of authority. You see the oldest male in the family disciplining other members of the family. And the family guarantees continuity. Even when you are dead, you will be remembered as a venerable ancestor, or you might be remembered as a dirty crook, which will stain the family and the descendants and dishonor the ancestors, but still you are part of something bigger. You are willing to sacrifice your life for a family. Look at the family reunion on the right. Generations, kids, older people, going back generations. Mothers and fathers will sacrifice their lives for their children. There is loyalty, there is love. Even if a child is mentally retarded or something, it is not rejected. The child is kept as part of the family. You live on in your children. Irvin A. Brown III. That is family tradition. Now, the family is also respected in most religions. What do we call a Catholic priest? We call them father, or nuns, or sister. The word pope comes from papa, which means big daddy. We talk about God the Father. Jesus was the Son of God. We are all children of God. So the family is considered by Confucianism as the bedrock of Confucian society. In fact, going back to your ancestral burial ground, keeping pictures of your ancestors in a family shrine in your house, cleaning the tombs of your ancestors, even if you have long since moved to Australia or England or Brazil, you maintain ties, you venerate your ancestors. You don't worship them because they are dead, but they live on through you and through you into your descendants. Covenants. Now, these are called agreements. For example, in Judaism, we have it, the covenant between God and Abraham, God and Noah, God and Moses. Christianity has, we call itself the new covenant between Jesus and humanity. Well, in Confucianism, covenants are between all kinds of people, not between God and humans, but the covenant between the emperor and the people. If the emperor does not live up to his obligations to maintain peace and security, then he can be overthrown. This is called the mandate of heaven. It gives right to revolution, overthrow a bad emperor and replace him with a new one. Marriage covenants are to be taken seriously. Even if the love is gone and you don't get along together, the man and the woman will still remain together and they will support the children, venerate the ancestors, and prepare for their descendants. Also in business, Confucianism argued that honesty, respect, cheating, and stealing are against the smooth running of a society. And that does not mean that my Chinese students do not cheat in my tests if they can get the chance. But once again, they are not violating a rule of God. If they steal something, they don't go to God in a confessional and tell Father George that they stole. They are damaging themselves and society. So covenants are freely entered into. You shake hands and you seal the covenant, and your honor, your good name, and you say in Hebrew, your Shem Tov, is based on keeping these covenants. Even a Confucianist marriage is highly scripted, formal affair. Who are the guests of honor? The groom's parents are seated because it marks the link between the man and the woman getting married and the ancestors. So the center is not the bride and the groom, but it is the groom's parents. Confucianism is very male-centered. The bride is the one in the center wearing a red dress and a blue headpiece. Once again, Confucianism prescribes the colors. She is presenting her mother-in-law with a cup of tea. Now, here again, not very liberating for women, but showing that she has mastered the arts of a smooth running, well-organized society. The groom usually wears a sash forming an X in front of him. Now, the marriage is between two people, an agreement between the wife and the groom's parents, but there is no priest who marries them. There's no rabbi. There is no religious authority. Marriage is a contract agreed upon not just between the two people, but between two families, two clans. So it is a unique approach to marriage. Mutual obligations, Genesis 15. Here again, in any smooth running society, as in Genesis 15, where they're talking of God is making a deal with Abraham, telling Abraham, all right, you worship me and only me and none of the other gods of the Greeks or the Romans or the Canaanites or the Babylonians or the Egyptians, then I will give you this land. If you fail to keep your obligation, you will lose your right to the land. Here again, an agreement is of mutual obligations, and you must keep your agreement. You buy a car, you sign a deed, how much you will pay every month. You are morally bound by these obligations, not because the priest is going to condemn you to hell, not because the police are going to come in and take you to jail, but because it guarantees a smooth running, well-oiled society. In fact, many people describe Confucianism as a well-organized society. Central to Confucianism is the word ren. Once again, I'm mispronouncing it. And it is an inner feeling of what is right. It's sort of like similar to a conscience. You don't need a God telling you what to do. You don't need a government passing laws to tell you what to do. You know when you see, hear, say, or do something that is wrong. You know that father to son is a unique relationship, which is very different from elder brother to younger brother, husband to wife, elder to junior, ruler to the subject, that instinctively humans are good. We know when something is right. We know when something is wrong. Here again, we don't need God telling us what is right or wrong. We know that murder and stealing and coveting our neighbor's wife is intrinsically wrong. So Confucianism has great respect for the individual. We don't need God to tell us the obvious. We know deep inside when something is right or something is wrong. Education, the next on the steps of what is essential in Confucianism. Now, education is extremely important. I mean, this always comes up in talking about Chinese because of Peter Stuyvesant High School here in New York is the best public school in New York. And the students are probably about 80% Asian of Confucian background, Vietnamese, Chinese, Korean, and Japanese. In fact, education is so important for Chinese that you go to any Chinese neighborhood and you are seeing after hours school, weekend school, remedial school, summer school, because education is the key to a perfect, well-run society and the career of an individual. I have a friend who is Chinese from Vietnam, and he was working in New York and his wife was working. And so when the kids would come home after school, he had the entire house installed with cameras. And the kids had their schedule when they had to be seated, at which chair, at which table, at which computer. They had to inform their parents by microphone what homework they were doing. And I remember listening to him once, and he started yelling at one of the boys, saying, "Why are you laughing? You told me you were doing mathematics. Mathematics is not funny. You must be doing something else. What are you doing?" Well, needless to say, both of the kids ended up getting into excellent schools and were very successful. In fact, at schools like the Peter Stuyvesant School, they have a quota system for backward people, which would be white people and Jews and blacks and Hispanics. So they try to reserve 1 or 2 seats for these backward races, while the 90% of the students are good, well-performing Confucian students. Now, education for Confucius was more than what we would call book learning. Rituals, how to speak to your superiors, how to venerate the emperor, how to venerate your ancestors was part of a strict education. Music, mastering music instruments, the intensity, the concentration. Archery, controlling the body, aiming the bow, and hitting the target. Anybody who's done sharpshooting like me know how a breath at the wrong time can totally ruin your aim. Charioteering, coordination between a man in a chariot, horses running over difficult terrain, mastering the chariot. Calligraphy, writing the Chinese letters. Arithmetic, mathematics. There are no mistakes in mathematics. Poetry and writing, mastering the language, writing poetry, and using the right word, the right expression, studying the writers of the past. Education was the key to success in China, and it remains very strong among people of Confucian backgrounds. In fact, in Confucianism, you were not born into a royal family. There were no nobility by blood. King of England, Queen of England inherits the throne from their parents or grandparents. Even if you are mentally deficient or a bad ruler, you have the throne through blood inheritance. Well, in China, it was a nobility of education, taking exams, very similar to the American civil service system. The more you learn, the more you master your skill, the higher you can rise in the administration of the country. In fact, the Dongling Academy, founded in the year 1111, is considered the oldest academy for training civil servants in the world. On the left, you see the entranceway, the monumental arch saying you are entering something special. You are leaving the outside world and you are entering a new world. On the right, you see the academy with these little sheds on either side where candidates for the civil service would be locked into their little cabin and they would have to take the tests, which could go on for weeks, with their food being delivered, no communication outside the academy. Until today, this great respect for education is central to the system of the smooth running Confucian society. The impressive thing when you go to Flushing, Queens, Chinatown, or to Chinatown in Lower Manhattan, the number of bookstores, voracious reading. In fact, in Elmhurst, where I live, I mean, whenever I go to the library during the school year, they have a huge study area. It is filled with Asians working together in groups, laptops. You might see one white person, one African American, and one Hispanic, but the rest are Asians working together in groups and as individuals in a peaceful environment without televisions blaring, without music blaring. Below, we see the Stuyvesant High School. Once again, the heaven of Asian students. In fact, at Harvard, my alma mater, there's a big issue that if based on test scores and grades and SAT tests, Harvard would be 90% Asian, with almost no white people, one or two Jews, almost no blacks or Hispanics, because of the Confucian veneration for education. And this is heralded as the origin of the American civil service. And in fact, we see how it is modeled and organized after the Confucian civil service academies, where you have people who study foreign affairs, personnel management, management analysis, general accounting, budget, legal counsel, passport visa services, public affairs, contract procurement, information technology. Here again, all of the elements necessary for the smooth running of a government. Local community, extremely important for the Chinese, as for everybody else. You live in a small town. Look at the rice terraces on the left. Now, one person, not even one family, not even one town could maintain these terraces, taking tons of dirt from the valley below, taking it up, building a stone wall, and raising terraces. I mean, this takes an immense amount of cooperation. And the local community takes care of its poor and elderly. It is a community responsibility, taking care of the sick and the weak. And so, as we saw with COVID-19, when the COVID broke out, the Chinese government would isolate a building, even an entire town, nobody in, nobody out, quarantining them. And it was effective in stamping out the COVID-19. The opposite was in the United States, where everybody was an individual. They would never have the rice paddies maintained because everybody would be off doing their own thing. The poor are on the street begging. The elderly are in nursing homes. The sick are in hospitals or long-term care. And when the COVID hit, everybody said, it's against my individual freedom to wear the mask. to stay home. And so you had the United States and Western Europe being ravaged by COVID-19 because it didn't have this sense of social responsibility. Very impressive when I was in Peking. I would sit at a McDonald's across from a big department store. The coffee was terrible, but they gave you free refills. So I sort of made do. But there was a factory, not a factory, but a big store across the street. And every morning at 6, I'm an early riser and McDonald's opens early, I would see all the employees lining up on the street in front of the store in their uniforms with their badges showing their function, greeting the managers as they walked in, singing the store anthem, and then turning about face with military precision, marching into the store. There was nobody running in late, nobody ignoring the manager, nobody refusing to bow at the manager as he or she walked into the store. Here again, many people criticize the Chinese as a smooth running machine. But yet, the Chinese will always cite they conquered COVID-19. They have drugged millions of people out of abject poverty in a mere couple decades. In fact, many countries are copying the Chinese Confucian system as a better organization for society than the highly individualistic society of the West. Worship was very important. Now, here again, we see Confucian temples. The Confucians are not priests. They do not have priests, even if they refer to them as priests. Inside of a temple, you will see the scrolls of the teachings of Confucius. Any statues of the Confucius will be outside. It is not the worship of a man, it is the veneration of the person's teachings. And the veneration of the Confucius as a great teacher is central to the Confucian organization of society. The next to the last step in the Confucian perfect society is the kingdom or the government. These are the outward expressions of your membership in the kingdom, called li in Chinese. These are the rituals, the customs, the rites, and the etiquette of a smooth running government administration. This is the instructions on the proper behaviors expected of the individuals based on their roles and placement in society. Governors, secretaries, the military, these all have a very high place in the smooth running of a society. Just as the tea ceremony shows the relationship between the bride and her mother-in-law to show that she is worthy. And it's not just throwing together a tea bag and some hot water and a little bit of milk and sugar on the side. It is an elaborate ceremony showing the place of a future daughter-in-law in the family of her husband. And so the administration of the government has a quasi-religious role. If you are a governor, or a secretary, or a minister in the government, or a member of the Congress or the councils or something, you are not just performing a function. You are part of creating a perfect society, heaven on earth. Now, the Confucian world that I'm describing extends beyond China. Of course, China is considered the center of the Confucian world. but it includes Taiwan, which is part of China, Singapore, predominantly Chinese, Vietnam, which is heavily Confucian, Japan, Mongolia, Korea are all considered part of the Confucian world. Now, the Chinese firmly believe that the Confucian core of China itself, the greenish yellow area there, which is the bulk of China, these are the most heavily civilized and heavily Confucianized people with various degrees of civilization the further away you get from the Han Chinese center of the world. Now, this Confucian culture transcends just China. In fact, even when a Chinese person migrates to Flushing or to the growing Chinatown of Mexico City or Singapore or India or London or Paris or South Africa, they still consider themselves part of China. They is considered part of Greater China. Both Indonesia and Thailand and Malaysia have between 6 and 7 million Chinese, very important in society. USA, almost 4 million, with various countries going the whole way down to Italy and France, with a growing population of Chinese. And this brings up a lot of issues because many people consider that even the Chinese in America having dual loyalties. Are they loyal to the United States or are they loyal to their greater Chinese identity? Similar objections are raised to Jews. Are they loyal Americans or are they loyal to Israel or are they loyal to Judaism as a religion? Same thing with Muslims. Are they loyal Americans? Can they be trusted? Are they loyal to Islam? And so you have this world community. Because of migration, the Chinese have taken their culture with them. And even if they cease to speak Chinese and assimilate, still they consider themselves Chinese, and their ideas of education, of government, of hard work are still deeply Confucianist. And here we see some of the Chinese national identities. You see the streets of Chinatown and of Flushing, the various holiday parades, the Chinese New Year being celebrated anywhere there are significant numbers of Chinese. So they take their culture, their language, and their Confucianism with them. Even if they end up joining a Christian church, sure, they can worship Jesus or they can worship the Quran, but deep down inside, it is the Confucian culture which has shaped their personalities. Now, at the top of the Confucian society, we have the emperor or the ruler. Now, central to the idea of the ruler is the mandate of heaven. Now, once again, when the Confucianists say heaven, they're not talking about a place up in the sky where the god sitting on a cloud and drinking beer. For them, heaven is the natural order of things. So if a ruler becomes a despot or a dictator or loses a major war, reduces the country to poverty, or does not conquer COVID-19, he is considered to have lost the mandate of heaven, and the people can replace him or her with a new ruler. Fundamental concept, in a way, justifying revolution. In fact, you see very much the Declaration of Independence. where the founding fathers accused King George III of not living up to his obligations as a king, violating the freedoms of the 13 colonies, and thereby justifying revolution. And so the right to rule China is granted by heaven. Once again, a word, but you have to define your word, not up in the sky where you go when you die, but the natural order of a earthly society. There can be only one legitimate ruler in China. The right to rule is based on the virtue of the ruler and his good performance as a steward of heaven, not by divine right, not by birth, not by God appointing him or her, but on the person's virtue and good performance. The right to rule may be passed down from father to son, but once the mandate is lost, the will of heaven towards a successor will only be known by the working out of the imponderable forces of events in human history. So there have been Chinese dynasties which have passed from father to son, but the son knew that he had to rule according to the mandate of heaven. So if Prime Minister Xi, for example, today would have not successfully conquered the COVID-19 pandemic, then he would have been considered losing the mandate of heaven, and the rulers of China, the people, would have been perfectly justified in removing him from his office. Now, Confucianism has no God. There's nothing above the emperor. There's no God crowning Charlemagne. There's no cross on the top of the crown of the emperor of China. There is no "in God we trust" in our money. There is no "one nation under God" in our pledge, in the Chinese Pledge of Allegiance. So here again, when we use words like heaven or God, we always have to define them. In the West, we have a very clear definition of God, whether it is Jehovah of the Jewish Bible, speaking with Moses and Abraham and intervening in history and giving commands, whether it is the half God, half man, Jesus, being born of an earthly mother and living on earth. Well, none of this has any influence on Confucianism. God, if the Confucians even use the word God, is not a person, he's not up in heaven. God is the correct order of creation: peace, prosperity, stability, compassion, the laws of nature. And so William James, a great philosopher of religion, defined God as the unseen order that governs the universe, the universal laws. And that would be a definition of God that a Confucianist could easily accept. Mandate of heaven, central to Confucianism. If you lose the mandate of heaven, you will lose your crown and maybe even your head. An evil ruler, a corrupt, exploitative, immoral, or unjust ruler will be overthrown. A ruler must deal with the consequences of earthquakes, floods, famine, epidemics, and civil wars, and maintain order in society. Now, many people criticize Confucianism as being authoritarian, as we have seen currently with Prime Minister Xi and his crackdown on Hong Kong, his crackdown on the Uyghur Muslims, the Tibetans, the Inner Mongolians, but yet that is his duty. It is a dog-eat-dog world. with Donald Trump trying to destroy China and keep it down. It is the duty of the ruler to preserve the prosperity of China and lead it into greatness, power, peace, and prosperity. So is Confucianism a religion, a philosophy, or an ideology? Well, the terms which we use in the West are not applicable. It is a blueprint for the building of a perfect society. Now, in China today, you see many people who are converted to Catholicism or other forms of Christianity, but yet they remain faithful to Confucianism as their great teacher. Now, sometimes the Catholics are not too happy to see a Chinese convert going to a Confucian temple and venerating the writings of Confucius, but still, they are not worshiping another god. You can be Jewish and have your own Jewish God, Jehovah, but yet venerate Confucian vision of society. Muslim and Confucian, you can even be an atheist and be in Confucian. In fact, I often say that the Communist Party in China today is simply Confucianism spray painted red. That there is very little difference between the authoritarian society of Karl Marx and Mao Zedong and the society espoused by Confucius. So what is the status of Confucianism today? Well, as we well know, and much to the consternation of American presidents and other presidents around the world, Confucianism is leading China ever faster into world great power status. The Chinese are convinced that the Confucian model of society is the most effective society. They are exporting Confucianism through a myriad of Confucius institutes. Look at the map of the United States. NYU, Columbia, all the major universities of America, Europe, in South America now have a Confucius Institute where they teach Chinese language, Chinese traditions, Confucian ideology, Confucian dance, archery, language, as a way, in their view, of civilizing barbarians such as individualistic Americans, making them aware of the importance of society, of family, and overcoming the superstitions of gods and worship of invisible creatures. So the Chinese very much view China as the middle kingdom and exporting Confucianism as a way of improving society. Confucius Institute at Pace University. They offer study abroad programs, cultural exchanges, credit courses that include travel to China, Chinese culture, past and present, Chinese language, Chinese calligraphy. Once again, spreading what Chinese believe is the best model for a peaceful, prosperous, well-organized human society. China clearly considers itself the middle kingdom. When you look at an ancient map of China on the left, you see the dot right in the center. Well, that is Beijing. Surrounding it is China. At the top, you see Mongols, and on the left, you see the Uyghurs, and at the south, you see the Tibetans and the Vietnamese. At the top, you see the Japanese and Koreans who have been successfully civilized by the teachings of Confucius. The red ring would be the people of Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Middle East, who have been somewhat exposed to the civilized teachings of Confucius, but yet are still mired in ignorance and the worship of fictitious gods and all these kinds of things. The next ring, the sort of yellowish ring, would be Europe and other areas of South Asia. The outer ring are the most barbaric peoples of the world. This would be the United States and Africa and other outlying peoples who have only been barely touched with the civilizing influence of Confucianism. So when China looks into the future, such as the book China 2049, economic challenges of a rising global power, there's more than just economic challenge, cultural challenge, the organization of society. More and more countries are looking towards the authoritarian model of China, which successfully drug millions of people out of abject poverty into prosperity, which conquered the COVID-19 virus, which is the model that many of these countries are following. When you look at a country like India, which still tries to follow the Western model of individualism and all that, being ravaged by COVID-19. Mexico, Brazil are starting to wonder if the Chinese Confucian model for the organization of a society is more appropriate and will be more effective in dragging their underdeveloped countries into the future. Well, the world is getting a bit worried about the growth and the influence of the Chinese model. China Inc. Book by Ted Fishman, How the Rise of the Next Superpower Challenges America in the World. Newsweek, China Inc. China's new companies are destroying their Asian competitors, and it's only going to get worse, portraying China as an octopus, grabbing everything. Well, here again, this is a typical American view of a rival. The United States does not treat anybody that threatens its world domination very well. I mean, 2 atomic bombs on Japan ensured that the United States would dominate the Pacific. War against Germany made sure that the United States would dominate the Mediterranean, Western Europe, Africa, and South America. We do not welcome the rise of a new power. How this will work itself through is the multi-million-dollar question. President Bush tried to keep China down, ban imports and exports, ban Chinese students from coming to America. Today, as I speak, President Biden is trying to find his own path to keeping America #1 and keeping China #2. Many books have been predicting the rise of China. My favorite is Martin Jacques' When China Rules the World, The Rise of the Middle Kingdom and the End of the Western World, rather ominous. Chinese economic power, state capitalism, the close cooperation between big industries and the government, once again reflecting the Confucian hierarchical order of society. Once again, Chinese investing heavily in the stock markets, expanding their economic clout worldwide. So that brings us to the end. We have raised some extremely serious questions here. What is a religion? Do we need a God? Can we get along without a God? Can we worship a human society? Do we need a personal God or gods, or have gods pretty much outlived their usefulness? Can God be an idea or a force, not a person? Can a God be a state, society, or nation? So you can say that the Chinese, yes, they have a God, but God is a well-run, prosperous, and peaceful China and world. So is communism a religion? I would say it is a religion, just like Confucianism is, but has dispensed with the need for a God. Is nationalism a religion? Well, we're seeing that in the United States under Donald Trump and with the Republicans, where we are worshiping not just the United States, but the United States as the instrument of God in the world. So when we look into the future and we say, well, is religion going to survive? Do we need gods? Can we create a powerful religion without a God? And we have sure seen that with Confucianism. And as they say, the proof is in the pudding. Confucianism raising millions out of poverty, making China a rival to the United States. And once again, as Martin Jacques said, get ready for when China rules the world. So it's hard to tell what the future is going to be like. So, as I often say, fasten your seatbelts, everybody, because the future is going to be a very interesting and bumpy ride. So, on that note, let me say thank you for joining me on this discovery of Confucianism, not just as some ancient religion lost in the mists of time, but shaping the most populous country in the world and spreading around the world. Now, if you have any comments or questions or criticisms or additions, contact me at ronbrownmedia@gmail.com. And I would love to hear some feedback on what you think of this presentation. And I look forward to seeing you in the near future for another exploration of a role of religion in the modern world, but with special emphasis on the future. So thank you again. This is Dr. Ronald Brown signing off. Thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you in the future.